In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about significant figures, also known as significant digits by some people. So, first off, a brief explanation of what a significant figure is. A significant figure is basically a digit that we are pretty confident is close to the right digit. So, for example, if we had the number 123, and we know that 1 and 2 are significant, what that means is that we're confident the 1 is pretty good, pretty close. And we're also pretty confident the 2 is close. Then the 3, we don't know if that's close or not because that's not a significant digit. So, the further to the right you go, the less confident you are that you're correct with your numbers, but we're still pretty confident that 2 is correct. So that's basically the gist of significant digits, an explanation of what they are. Now I'm going to describe how to count significant digits. Okay, so the rules go like this. The place where you start counting is the furthest non-zero number to the left. Then, where you stop counting depends on what type of number it is. So if there is no decimal place, what you're going to do is you're going to stop at the last non-zero number. If there is a decimal place, you're going to stop at the last number regardless of whether or not it's a 0. So if there is no decimal place, it has to be 1 through 9. If there is not, if there is a decimal place, then it can be any number including 0. So let's do a few examples here. Let's say we had the number 21050, and you were told to count up the number of significant figures. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first rule. We start counting all the way to the left. Then we go to the second rule, and we notice there is no decimal place here. So what that means is we're going to end at the last non-zero number, and that's a 5. If we count up all the numbers and the numbers in between, we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 significant figures. And that would be our answer. Now, let's take the same number, but let's change it up a little bit. Let's say we just added a 0.0 to the end. So, start at the same place, all the way to the left. Now, you realize that because there is a decimal place, we're going to end at the last number right here. That's 0. So, if we count up these numbers now, we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Now there's one last situation that shows up for these types of problems. Sometimes you're given a number and you're asked to round to a certain number of sig figs. So let's say you were given this number and you were told to round to 4 significant figures. Okay, so first off what you want to do is you want to count 4 figures starting from the far left. Right? Start from the far left. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4. So this is your 4th significant figure right there. That's 6. Now what you're going to do is, because the number after that is greater than 5, you're going to round that 6 up to a 7. That's your first step. 5, 1, 2, 7. Then these 3 numbers after right here, this is very important, and you're going to put them as zeros. Sort of just as placeholders. That way, a lot of people make that mistake. They leave these out. The problem then is that you've actually shrunk your number quite a bit, right? Right here, this is 7 long. If you didn't put those zeros, this would only be 4 long. So that's quite a significant change. So you want to make sure that when you're rounding significant figures, all the numbers that you get rid of, you leave as placeholder. You leave some placeholder for them. So that's basically the gist of counting significant figures and rounding significant figures. Sometimes, actually quite often in chemistry, basically every problem you run into that has math and chemistry is you're going to need to add, subtract, multiply, or divide to some extent. And what that's going to do is that's going to change the number of significant figures that your answer has. So what you want to think of is, how do I figure out how many significant figures my answer is going to have? Now there are two separate rules. There's one for adding and subtraction, one for multiplying and dividing. Let's start with the adding and subtracting. If you are given numbers to add or subtract, what you're going to do is you're going to start by just doing the arithmetic, right? So if it's a big number, you type it in your calculator, you get your answer out, and then what you do is you take the smallest number of decimal places between the numbers that you're adding and subtracting together, and however many decimal places the smallest is, that's going to be how many decimal places your answer will have. So if you add a number with 3 decimal places to a number with 2 decimal places, your answer is only going to have 2 decimal places because that's the smallest number between them. Now, if you're multiplying and dividing, you're going to do a similar process, right? You start with the arithmetic, you multiply them together, or you divide them together. But then, after you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to take the smallest number of significant figures between the two numbers, and that's going to be the number of significant figures of your answer. So be very careful here. It's easy to get these two rules mixed up. Just remember, with adding and subtracting, you're counting decimal places, and with multiplying and dividing, you're counting significant figures. Keeping that in mind, let's do a few practice problems here. Let's say we were told to add 4320.41 and 89.338. Okay, so first off, you start with the arithmetic. What is the sum here? If you were just to type this in your calculator, what are you going to get? Now what I got was 4409.748. Okay, so this is the unrounded answer. But we realize that between these two numbers, the smallest number of significant figures, I'm sorry, not significant figures, decimal places, is 2, right? This is 3 decimal places, that's 2 decimal places. So that means we're only going to keep 2 decimal places here. So we're going to stop at that 4 right there. That's our last significant figure. Because there's an 8 after it, that means that 4 rounds up to a 5. So we'll have 4409 and then 0.75. Oh. There we go. And then that there is our answer. So do the summation, count the number of decimal places between the two things you added up, and then you round the decimal places here. Now let's say instead we were multiplying two numbers. We have the number 31.98 times 2.87. First off, we start with multiplying them. Now I got 91.7826. Now, count up, because this is multiplication and division, you're going to count up significant figures, not decimal places. This has 3 sig figs. This has 4 sig figs. Smallest there is 3, so I'm just going to count up 3 sig figs here. Starting at the 9, going back to, that 7 is our last significant figure. So, 91 point, right after the 7 is an 8, so we're going to round that 7 up. 91.8. And that there is the correct number of significant figures. Now that's most of what you'll deal with in chemistry, is going to be problems like the ones we've done. But there is a special case that should be covered just in case you run into it later. So let's say that we were given a number like this. Okay, so we have 21901, and let's say we're told to round this to 4 significant figures. We start at the first number, that 2 right there. We go back to the 4th number, that's the 0. So that 0 is our last significant figure. And then the number right after that is a 1, because that's less than 5, we don't round it. So you might be inclined to think the correct number here is this right there, 21900. And although that's correctly rounded, there's a bit of an error here, because if you were to run into this number, you would think there's only 3 significant figures here, because you don't know that that 0 is significant. So how do we indicate that that 0 is significant? Well, the most common way I've seen to do this is to convert this to scientific notation. So, remember how scientific notation works. We start by writing the first number out, and then we put the decimal right after that. Then we write out the rest of the significant figures, right? The 1, 9, and then that 0. So that's these numbers right here. Now what we do is, remember, you have a decimal place, an implied decimal place at the very end of this chain of numbers. So we think of how many decimal places we had to move in order to get right behind the 2. And then if you count it out, you move 4 times. So what we do is we just write times 10 to the 4th. And then that there would be a better way of writing this number, so that way you can see the number of significant figures. So a pretty rare case, but it does show up from time to time, so it's important to know how to handle it. And that's basically the gist of significant figures.